Hey, welcome everybody to Pro Mindset Podcast. We have a gentleman on today that I've been on his podcast. He's a podcaster. The title of his podcast is called ALLSMITH, and his name is Bryce Smith. And Bryce is a CrossFit competitor. Besides being a podcaster, he's been a collegiate athlete, a professional athlete overseas in the hoops world. Bryce, welcome to Pro Mindset today, buddy.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm excited to chop it up with you today.
We are going to chop it up. Talk to me about what is your banner on Instagram? What is your banner in life? What is your career calling? Because everybody's a podcaster. Everybody does that stuff, right? Everybody works out. So what is your official title?
You know, it's a really great question, and I think that's a question that gets tossed around a lot, especially with the upcoming holidays, right? Like, who are you? What do you do? And I think the thing that's unique a little bit about me is that first and foremost, I'm here to serve. I'm here to help. I'm here to co-pilot people's journeys towards their peak expression. But as we joked about offline, I also love to say that I'm a professional mistake maker and a lifelong learner.
Amen. Okay, so I just want to get this out of the way because I was following you on Instagram and I saw that someone in your family passed recently. Why don't you share with the audience what's been going on with your fam?
Yeah, so the ALLSMITH podcast was born a few years ago. It started underneath a brand that I worked for over a decade called Invictus Fitness. And in 2018, my father was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And at that time, I was training for the CrossFit Games. And I just remembered coaching until about 8 or 8:30 at night. And I would smash a 5-hour energy or a coffee, and I'd drive up to LA at nighttime. And I'd look at my father and I'd be like, man, I know this guy is my dad. We traveled all over the world for basketball events and whatnot, especially in high school. And I looked at him and I'm like, I want to get to know him as a man. And I asked him about Vietnam. I asked him about dating my mom. I asked him about real estate and investments and what his training was like. It unlocked something in my mind that seems cliche, but at that time I was ready to receive the fact that everybody has a story we know absolutely nothing about. It taught me about compassion, empathy, everything in between, because up until that moment, especially being in professional sports and later high-level CrossFit, self-reliance is everything. Just outwork the competition, take your emotions and just bury them and just work and work and work. And that works until it doesn't work anymore. And then you need a little bit more direction. You need some parameters to play in. And I think that experience really shaped me into a little bit of who I am now. And then right at the beginning of 2024, my mom was actually then diagnosed with cancer. And that started with me and my siblings really just being like, really, we're going to go through this again. And, you know, we had our week or so of kind of being in the dumps and sort of just like questioning the why and looking up into the sky and wondering, why is this happening again? And then we came to the resolution that life's not happening to us, it's happening for us. What can we learn here? How do we better connect with our mom? How do we open up insights or tinker with reservoirs of potential to then pursue a better understanding of her and her life? And she was such a giver and such a caretaker to the world. And it's just a special opportunity for all of us to carry on that legacy and realize some of the beauty that she brought into the world. And I'll share this last little bit for your listeners, and it's something I talk about a lot on ALLSMITH. My father said this in his last, 5 to 10 minutes alive. He said, you know, Bryce, in life there's givers and there's takers. The givers sleep better at nighttime. And I think if we carry on within the world with that legacy, the world's not only going to be a better place, but I think there is like a karma factory. By you giving to other people and giving your best effort and showing up consistently, it really does elevate the frequency of the room. I mean, think about that in a sports locker room. If you're given good energy, you're given positive vibes, you're given your best effort, everybody else has this little thing called NFC. It's called no fucking choice. They got to elevate too. And at that point, when iron is sharpening iron, you're just around a tribe of individuals that are seeking to be better and have more fun and be connective. And to me, that's a great story when you get to the end.
No doubt. Sports locker rooms. I saw something on the media here in the last couple of weeks where a linebacker from Oklahoma, who's a scholarship kid, star player in their defense, gave up 50 grand of his NIL money to all the walk-ons at OU.
Wow, that's awesome.
Think about the
That's
magnetism.
badass.
Think about the magnetism in that locker room. Think about the togetherness and the brotherhood that he created by that one act of kindness. Over 50 grand, which is a lot of money, but for him, he's probably making $500,000. He's not going to miss it. He's got free food. He's got free housing. He's got free gym. I mean, he's got everything taken care of, and he's got this money. It's just a surplus, but his one act of kindness changes that whole team. So I see
Tremendously.
OU, not necessarily based upon their talent, having a great season because what's going on in that locker room where he elevated the vibration in that locker room by his one act of kindness, where he did what your dad said. He gave instead of took.
Yeah, that's huge, man. The willingness to even think about that, right? Like at such a young age, being a collegiate athlete and thinking outside of yourself and developing the level of perspective, realizing that, okay, like I've got my housing, my food, a lot of the boxes are checked in my lifestyle. A lot of these guys are working extra jobs, relying on family, relying on friends, maybe student loans to try to pay their way. And I think just the sheer wherewithal to show that, I call it gas, to show that you give a shit, to show that you're there to try to help and support the collective rather just the individual. That's a really special. That's cool, man. I'm gonna have to take note of that and watch those guys now. So you just made me a fan.
Well, here's the thing that's really interesting is that the guy that's in the limelight gave to the guys that nobody even knows their names. Walk-ons in college football, generally nobody knows their names. Every now and then there'll be a guy that breaks through and gets a scholarship, but for the most part, they don't get to play. Some of them may not even get to travel. They just get to dress for home games. So that's huge. Let's go back to your father. What is the one aspect of the unknown story of your dad that didn't surprise you because it's in you, but you didn't know it was in him?
The word that comes to mind is belief, right? Like there's something, I think you and I talked about it briefly on our podcast. There's something to the human experience that can't quite be seen. It must be felt. And he had this intrinsic belief in me. I think he also had it for UCLA football. We grew up going to the Rose Bowl, and even in their bad years, he had this little glimmer of hope that maybe they were going to come around. And I think when you take that word, it's so much bigger than what it looks like on paper. It's a feeling. And when somebody believes in you that much, inevitably you choose to put in the work. And you really do have to be willing to bet on yourself because nobody else will. And I think he bet on me, and he was willing to take me to all the different practices all over the inner city of Los Angeles. I was the only white kid in the gym most of the time. And oftentimes it was just really showing up consistently to give me the opportunity to pursue my peak expression. And I don't know that I fully grasped that while he was alive, right? Everything is better understood in retrospect. And so now in how I pursue my coaching, it's that I see these little glimmers of potential in people. And then I listen to them speak and I see their limiting beliefs. And we practice the art of perspective architecture where maybe they're looking over here, but if I just kind of tilt their head to kind of look the other way, all of a sudden it unlocks a little bit more that maybe they didn't see or feel before, and teasing out that level of potential or hope that lives inside of them, but they don't really know it, see it. And you try to make it more tangible. You change the language. You use imagery. You use metaphorical analogies that maybe relate to the individual. And this has worked for recreational athletes, professional athletes, high-performing individuals that are entrepreneurs, own tons of businesses. And I think that level of belief, I mean, I'll use a great example here. Is Steph Curry without Steve Kerr? Right? When you looked at Steph Curry right off the bat, his scouting report was small, undersized, decent handle, low release, sometimes takes volatile shots, shoots too many threes, not a great defender, not big enough, going to be a constant mismatch in the NBA. All of a sudden, you get to the NBA, he's fighting ankle injuries. He's fighting all these different things that make him unable to maximize his human potential. But really early on, you saw Mark Jackson really believe in him a little bit. And then when Mark Jackson moved on, Steve Kerr stepped in, and Steve Kerr was a three-point shooter. Steve Kerr understood that when Michael Jordan believed in him and gave him some of those passes in the crunch time of the fourth quarter when he was getting double and triple teamed, that level of belief allowed him to then be successful. If it was always pessimistic or questioning or not believing in their true capacity, you're now operating out of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, as opposed to stepping up to a plate and trying to hit a home run. They're stepping up to the plate and like trying not to strike out. That's two different ideologies. And with this being the Pro Mindset podcast, like when you look at Steph Curry, Steve Kerr believed him. He gave him the green light. He allowed him to miss 10 shots, knowing that if he made the 11th, he might make 10 in a row. And then that bled downstream into Klay Thompson. And then that bled downstream into Draymond Green being like, you know what, I'm going to set great screens. I'm going to make great passes. I'm going to be an awesome decoy and a locker room guy to elevate the energy in the room. And I'm going to show that I also believe in you. And I think when that starts at the top and it trickles down, all of a sudden you get the success that the Warriors had for years. And so going back to that question that you asked, like my father instilled that level of belief in me. And now I feel so honored to pay that forward into clients and friends and podcast guests, because I might be able to see something that they might not be able to see. And it's a special set of lenses to have that level of optimism in comparison to pessimism.
It's almost having spiritual eyes. One of the things that your father did, and some dads do this, some don't, is he gave you the keys to unlock your potential by believing in you. And when you do it for your son, or you do it for your clients, or you do it for your players if you're a coach, or your employees if you run a business, you give them permission to be great when you believe in them. We all have this unworthiness of some type, some level, some nature. And when someone else believes in you, maybe even more than you believe in you, all of a sudden you rise to that level. And I've seen this year with the Indiana Fever. I've become a huge Caitlin Clark fan. I watched a handful of their games. I'm watching their game tonight. They started out 1-8. She couldn't get a pass off. She wasn't ready for the length. She wasn't ready for the physicality. And I think she didn't have to play that level of defense in college. She gets to the WNBA, and these are grown women. And patience, belief, opportunity. And now she's setting records every game.
Totally. Big Caitlin Clark fan over here as well. Just, I think Charles Barkley talked about it this morning, just the level of negative media that she's receiving. And she's just kind of able to finagle around it. She's not getting stuck in the weeds. She's focusing on what's in her control. And what comes to mind there, Craig, is life's this beautiful game of perspective. And the stories that we tell ourselves really shape the way that we live. And I think for her, she's really emphasizing, and at least in her headspace, control the controllables. What are the things that I can do that allow me to keep my lenses right here, which is to make shots, be a great teammate, play great help side defense, communicate, show up on time, among many other things. But she's not allowing the noise in. And she's creating this great buffer for herself, where we talked about it recently on a spiritual podcast that I did. And that was basically like, we can allow negative thoughts to like come say, what up? Hey, we know you exist. you're not allowed to Velcro to me. You're not allowed to live in my headspace. I can't stop you from being there. And I understand feelings are going to come and go, but I get to choose my behaviors. And I think when you hold on to that tangible element, whatever your field, there's a great level of control and power knowing that your habits are going to carry you through in the midst of extreme adversity, right? Like there's character and there's reputation. Character is who you really are. And so many people, you see this a lot in college sports. People dog it or they half-ass practice. And then when coach shows up, all of a sudden they go to this other gear. Cool. That might fake it for a little while. But at some point, like you're going to grind down that muscle a little bit because it doesn't have hypertrophy. It hasn't grown because you don't shape it in the dark to be able to consistently shine in the light. Looking back at Caitlin Clark, like when you control the controllables, you just focus on doing the next right thing. And knowing and seeing her, she probably works harder when people aren't watching. And I think when you do that, it shows next, not just in your performance, but in your demeanor. Are you cool, calm, collected when people are grabbing you? When you're not getting the foul call, when people are jawing in your ear and talking all kinds of smack? Maybe somebody's trying to trip you. Maybe they're sticking out a knee or a hip. Are you reactive? Or do you recognize these things and then just not allow them in and just keep doing the little things that allow you to kind of microdose success over the course of time?
I think the sky's the limit for her because what I've seen is that her teammates have finally accepted her.
Mhm.
She's leading the league in assists.
Yeah.
How many scorers like that are prolific assist people? Not those two don't typically go together. And so I think by virtue of her, like I watched the game the other night, she turned down shots for teammates, which gives her more freedom to take the shot when she's got the shot.
It also makes her more dangerous, right? Like how often in professional sports is there's so much tape now, right? And if she becomes, every time she gets the ball, she's shooting. Well, now she's a predictable player. She's not looking to get a shot. She's looking to get the best shot. And I think when you have that level of discipline and your teammates stay ready so they don't have to get ready, now it creates this cohesiveness because nothing's worse than you being a teammate of a high profile player like that. And you're kind of just standing in the corner and you're like, I'm not getting this pass. You don't actually believe in the star player's ability to trust you. And I think what's happening is because Caitlin's putting in the work, and she's not putting in the work from an egotistical hierarchy of like, I'm better than you. I think she's like, hey, I'm going to go get shots up. You want to get shots up with me? Hey, let's get some extra sprints in. Like she's being connective and inviting. And I think when you do that, it shows on the court in the sense of she's making that extra pass because they're getting those extra shots up together and she has a level of trust. They put in the same work that I do. So when I get double teamed, triple teamed, like I can swing it quick or I can get into a gap. I could draw their defender and then get them a better shot than me shooting a contested shot. And I think when you have that level of trust, which comes from proof of concept and putting in the work, that unlocks where everybody on that court, all 5 players are dangerous weapons. When you get that ball moving, the defense can't stop that. That's very, very difficult when you start creating that level of ball movement, buy-in, and trust with one another.
I would love to see a comparison of the Fever's games, like first 3 or 4 games versus the last 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Because in the first 3 or 4, there was a lot of turnovers because there's miscommunication. They didn't trust each other. They didn't understand each other's games. And now it's like when they do back cuts, I mean, it's an easy layup. And they get about 5 or 6 of those every game because there's trust and I'm making the effort to take it. I'm going to without the ball. I'm going to go to the hole and I'm going to get the ball.
Yeah. And that's another thing too. Like there's a half-ass cut, right? And then there's a cut like with hope. I might get the ball here. I'm going to run hard. And when you do it with that level of authenticity, you're not like trying to fake the defense. The defense has to step over and play a little bit of help side. Well, if they're leaning this way or their weight shift is over here and you fake that pass and then you find somebody over here, now it It's so cool to watch. It's literally poetry in motion. It's one of my favorite things about the sport of basketball. I also love it in football too.
Who's your favorite basketball player of all time?
And it's a great question. I definitely grew up a Kobe fan. Just being from the inner city of LA, one of my favorite things was just watching how, as he got older, he couldn't rely on his athleticism anymore. He had to understand angles. He had to understand how to fake people certain ways or use, a little chicken wing to get himself a little bit of extra space. I would default and say that early on. But as my life has evolved and I've looked at overcoming adversity and the concept of we're either in adversity, just left adversity, or we're approaching adversity, to me that's Steph Curry. Like, just seeing that he's undersized. He went to Davidson. He was not a big time recruit, very similar to me. I felt like he was very overlooked. And then based on the belief that his coach had in him at Davidson, the work ethic that he put in, and I mean, he's famous now for, it's not just the work ethic when everybody's eyes are on him when the ball's in his hands or he's making threes. His level of conditioning and forcing these guys to chase him around just creates movement. In my world, we talk about movement being medicine, but movement also forces the defense to make decisions. When you make so many decisions, what happens? I mean, you experience this as a business owner and agent. There is a thing called decision fatigue, and that's very real. What are you going to do? You're going to close out on Steph, and then you're going to get a wide open shot from Clay. Now you're going to close out on Draymond. Draymond's going to penetrate to the basket, and the defense is going to collapse. Well, now he's got options. Now they've got some of their bigs. They've got so many different options there. And so when you're looking at the intangibles, it started with Kobe early on just as a sheer bias and loving the Lakers and seeing how he developed his game over the course of time, especially after the Achilles injury. I mean, we've seen Achilles injuries really change the trajectory of people's careers. And the fact that he was able to make some of those very difficult shots and will himself to be as successful as he possibly could was cool. But I think I've defaulted more towards Steph just because he's continued to do it at a high level, being very undersized, maintaining also this great demeanor. He loves his family off the court. He seems to not always be in trouble. He's made great investments. I mean, he took a leap of faith and signed with Under Armour when prior to that, really the only guy that was with Under Armour before him was Brandon Jennings. And he's from the inner city of LA. He was a stud. And what hurt his career was an Achilles injury. I mean, he played for the Bucks, had a 50-point game, and was a stud in the NBA there for a while. And then after that Achilles injury, just lost that level of explosiveness. We saw that also from John Wall. And so seeing Kobe respond to that was cool. But then seeing how Steph's overcome all the ankle injuries changed the game, literally. I mean, other than Allen Iverson bringing in hip-hop culture and the swaggy crossover and the tattoos and all the things, Steph Curry, the moment the ball is in his hands and the moment he crosses half court, is a threat. And you look at the volume of three-point shots that are being taken now, you look at three-point percentages. If you can't shoot the ball anymore, like, you're not in the sexy 450, which is there's 450 jobs in the NBA. And every man on that floor needs to shoot, even the bigs now. And back in the day, you could kind of be a specialist or kind of hide within your arena of expertise or your maximal skill set. Now you got to be able to do a little bit of everything. And he's made himself not just a shooter, but the ability to penetrate and finish around the basket, despite being 6'3", which sounds big in the world, but when you're shooting over guys that are 6'8" to 7'3" with 7'6" wingspans and 40-inch verticals, it's a little bit more difficult than what may meet the eye on television.
Okay, so NFL season's underway today.
Mm-hmm.
Who's your favorite player in the NFL?
Christian McCaffrey, my man. Just his level of work ethic and
insane.
I feel like he brings the mentality that Baker Mayfield came in with, which is walk-on mentality. The dude's a worker. The dude finds a way to maximize his potential, and I'm also a little biased. He's done some pool training with the XPT crew, Extreme Performance Training, which is Laird Hamilton and Gabby Reese up in Malibu. And I'm just a big fan of, like, okay, you can only get so many sets and reps of sprinting on the field or A lot of these guys train at the sand dunes there in Manhattan Beach or in Leo Carrillo here on the West Coast in California. Those are all great tools. A lot of people are doing that stuff. I developed the most explosiveness I've ever had training at the Santa Monica Stairs and the sand dune there in Manhattan Beach. Like, they are game-changing tools. And also to be barefoot and get really dexterous with your feet and your toes and those micro muscles of the calves, learn to accelerate, decelerate. Huge. Christian McCaffrey does all that stuff. He's also huge in the weight room. He's always maintaining a positive attitude, but I think there's a little bit of a difference maker in his spiritual connection to his breath, to getting into the pool, and then also integrating the recovery techniques within the sauna and the ice. And I think that's easy to check the box a little bit as a professional. I think, oh yeah, I'm doing my recovery. I did the cold tub. But when you actually do it and you think about it as like a state change, and there's a connection of mind, body, soul, you can only go so far physically, man. Like, there has to be a mental connection where you love the work. And I think a lot of guys, like we alluded to a little bit offline, they're not really playing to win. They're playing to survive or to make it to the next contract. Or they're playing to maximize their game tape so that way they can create legacy wealth for their family. When I look at Christian McCaffrey, Patrick Mahomes, and some of these other guys, they're just different, man. And I think the difference is in doing some of the boring work that's unsexy, like the sauna and the cold plunge that, doesn't look great on Instagram, but is kind of this really popularized thing right now. Like, everybody says, can you cold plunge without posting it on your story? And I think when you do those things, you do them consistently, you just keep your mind, your body, and your spirit in this unique connection. And if you try to isolate any of those and make it all physical, there's going to be a missing link. I mean, you could be the fastest, the strongest guy out there, but if it's not right here, you're not going to last the NFL season when things start getting a little hectic. The bumps, the bruises, the food, the sickness, getting tired of your teammates, getting railed on by coaches, the travel. Maybe it's not going well at home and you're trying to numb yourself and distract yourself, and the temptation to go out and be a part of party culture and connect with the team. There's so many different choices that get made within an NFL season, and I just think that some of the best in the world understand the dosage of those choices, and Christian McCaffrey is the one that comes to mind.
My first introduction to CMAC was his freshman year in high school. He was playing varsity for Valor in Denver, and they played our home high school, Pine Creek, here in Colorado Springs. And he was the best player in the field as a freshman.
Wow.
And the
Why?
last time I saw him play in high school before he went to Stanford, it was the playoffs his senior year. His senior year, they played like 14 games, one state, and he had 10, and I might be correct on this, so if I'm wrong, I'm not wrong by more than one, 10 first touch touchdowns. That means the first time he touched the ball on the ground, or in the game, kickoff return, punt return, run, receiving out of the backfield. It was a TD. And in that particular game, it was a punt. He caught the punt, and it was like he was going 2x faster than everybody else.
Yeah.
Like, it was crazy. And so all I've ever seen with this young man is hard work. He's had another gear. He's had a gear more than, there's a lot of hard workers. His hard work's different. His dark work is off the charts. What he puts his body through off the field makes football easy.
Mm-hmm. When you saw him as a freshman, what was it that unlocked that thought in your mind that he was the best player on the field? Was it the extra gear that you saw at that time, or was he doing the little things? Because I would imagine as a freshman, he was a lot smaller than everybody else.
And his brother was a stud too. Max was a stud. And I think Max was like a junior or senior that year. And he ended up having a cup of coffee in the NFL with Packers and a few teams. And I think he's a coach now. But Christian, there was no on-ramp. He was from 0 to 100 like that. That's what I noticed was, most guys, especially white guys, it takes them a minute to get up to full speed, 3 or 4 steps. No, 1 step and he's there. His acceleration was world class. And I think he's trained himself to have world-class athleticism. Yes, he has good genes, but he's got world-class speed, world-class everything because of his world-class work ethic.
The other thing that I would note about him is you see this a lot in basketball too. Like when people think speed, they just think like max effort, 100-meter sprint. That's not sports. It's the ability to change speed, change direction, decelerate, and be adaptable in the midst of seeing a crease when you're crossing the line of scrimmage, or adapting based on a player falling in front of you, or pushing your blocker a little bit and then maneuvering yourself accordingly. He has that. And the ability to bounce off tackles. He can stay low. He doesn't get his hips or his shoulders too high. So it gives him options that not everybody has. And just the willingness to stay low and be explorative and playful. He's so fun to watch.
The last thing I would say about C-Mac is that he performs in the flow. And
Yes.
you can't respond like he responds unless you're in the flow. You're relaxed. You're confident. You're actually seeing what's going on. Where I see a lot of NFL running backs, they're fast. They're powerful. They're badasses. But man, they're one speed. And you know what? The hole's not open. They don't know where to go. You know, they don't flow. They're like
They tighten
hammer.
up a little bit.
What's that?
They tighten up a little bit. And you
They
and I
do.
both know the best athlete is the most relaxed athlete. And plus getting tackled, you got to brace a little bit. But you don't want to be so stiff all the time. And there's a time and a place, but the ability to try to bounce off tackles and, like you said, have that flow, it's a little bit of a dance.
So you do CrossFit, you coach clients in CrossFit. Share with our audience that may not be familiar with CrossFit. I think everybody knows what it is. But let's just assume they know. Kind of give everybody an overview of the space and then your role in that space.
Yeah, totally. Basketball concluded. I played professionally in Sweden for a little while, and I went through that lull, that identity shift. Who am I when I'm not an athlete, right? Like I got the famous question, like, hey man, what do you do now? And for 20 plus years, it was playing high level basketball. And so in my mind, I knew I had a little bit more left in the tank. I just knew it wasn't for basketball anymore. I didn't have the same love and joy that I once did. And I definitely made peace with the sport when playing overseas in Europe. And so afterwards, when I came back, I began as an intern in the strength and conditioning room up at Cal State Northridge in the LA area. And I started just cleaning up chalk and learning and going to school. And that evolved into a student assistant job, into an assistant job where I got to coach players and teams and learn a lot. And I kind of fell in love with the CrossFit methodology at that time. Constantly varied, high intensity functional movement, which I think has evolved, at least for me as I've gotten a little bit older, where it's not always high intensity. It's varied intensity. And that allows for some days to be, all gas, no brakes, some days a little bit moderate, some days intervals, some days longer paced pieces, some days mobility and bodybuilding, things like that. And what I really gained from that experience was that it's this all-inclusiveness. They seemingly took weightlifting, gymnastics, strength and conditioning, track and field, mindset, bodybuilding, functional bodybuilding, community, among a few other ingredients, tossed them all into a smoothie and made this digestible product that was a very well-rounded individual. And that was something I always prided myself in, just from a value standpoint. Like I never wanted to be just great at basketball. I want to be great at basketball and a great student and a great teammate and a great friend and a great brother and son. And my parents instilled those values, like whatever you are, just be a good one. And understanding that throughout the day, you're going to wear different hats and you're going to have different roles and you're going to have to understand how to compartmentalize different parts of your life. So you're not word vomiting or bleeding everything into that particular moment. I liked that about CrossFit. I also really liked that, I was a little bit biased more towards just traditional athleticism. And I lacked the mobility to do some of the weightlifting things in relation to the snatch, the clean and jerk. And it was cool for me to unlock certain tissues and see how it enhanced my mobility and still gave me that crave for competition, kind of let me scratch that itch of still wanting to compete, try to do things that I never thought I could do. And most people in the CrossFit space are under 6 feet. So for me to be about 6'4", 220 pounds, pursuing this sport, I kind of felt like the black sheep. And I liked that. I liked being different and not allowing like my size or my genetics to be the limiting factor, but more so my will to succeed and to go against the grain and grant other big people the permission to seek their edges and see what's possible. And then the gymnastics component was really cool. I mean, I didn't grow up spending a lot of time upside down or playing on rings or doing, tons of pull-ups with my long arms. I mean, all the gymnastics things are very difficult. And I don't know, I just took it upon myself to be like, you know what? You get one life. Let's see how far I can take this sport. Let's play with it. And then I realized as I was there, everybody in there was smart in some capacity because they all came from a different background. So I became this sponge where I'd get advice from the power lifter guy, and then I'd get advice from the football guy, then I'd get advice from the gymnast, I'd get advice from the person doing parkour, and then I really absorbed the coaching. So I felt like it was education, it was play, it was exploration, and there was fitness all at once. And then I realized in taking all this stuff in, I was a better coach at the university. I was then going to seminars and I was realizing, like, whoa, there's basically the school component where you're in class and you're learning the X's and O's. Great. It's like a film session. But you also need the practical component. And I felt my original exposure to CrossFit was that. It was a practical component that gave me ideas and innovation and helped me realize, oh, this works, this doesn't work. And then as a byproduct, that started to evolve a little bit, and I got okay at the sport where I was a pretty good team athlete, especially being built different than some of the other individuals. And so I qualified for the CrossFit Games on Team Invictus in 2015, 16, 17, and 18. And I've enjoyed it. It was a very special time in my journey. And it also taught me so many different elements of fitness where I could customize them to the individual in my coaching business. And what started as working with big teams at the university transitioned into a group coaching model and eventually transitioned to what's called semi-private coaching. So I work with 4 to 8 individuals at once on 8 different programs typically. And it is so fun to help meet people where they're at and realize that connection of their story in relation to movement, where fitness can kind of be the vessel that guides them, where it enhances their confidence, their relationships, their trust, deconstructing some of the limiting beliefs that they've had throughout their life. And that journey kind of started down here in San Diego at Invictus in 2014 and just concluded about a month and a half ago. And now we're building everything into the ALLSMITH platform. And it's really cool to kind of take these things in a slightly different direction where I get to kind of be the umbrella and oversee things and do things based on what I saw at the university, what I saw in basketball, what I saw in CrossFit. And it's now evolved into this all-encompassing lifestyle design approach where it's not just about fitness, but fitness is one of the beautiful spokes in the wheel that synergizes with mindset and recovery and connectivity and this real life network, which has become like a LinkedIn and this fun support group where everybody's bouncing ideas off of one another and exploring their bodies and their minds in different ways. And I've really enjoyed the learning curve. It's subtly been painful at times, and I've made every mistake in the book, but learned from them and continue to learn from them. And it started with just being willing to not let go of that little glimmer of like, man, I want to hold on to this competitiveness and for a little bit longer. I think my body and my mind are capable of it, and I wouldn't do it any other way if I could go back in time.
Is there a spiritual component to ALLSMITH? I'm just curious.
Absolutely. I really do think that, like I said previously, there's something to the human experience that you can't see, that you have to feel. And what unlocked for me was that I put a sauna and a cold plunge at my house. And the reason for that is in 2018, when I went through an additional identity shift, so the first one was going from basketball into what's next. That became CrossFit and coaching. And then in 2018, when I tore everything in my elbow, attention to wanting to compete in the sport of CrossFit wasn't wasn't quite there anymore. And I definitely wanted to play with the transferable skills into entrepreneurship and building a brand and building something that I felt like could leave a legacy, especially in starting to think about my own mortality after losing my father. My interests just started to change. And I remember going up to Laird Hamilton's house, and he and I did a pool workout. It was super fun. We were playful. I was hypoxic the whole time. And I was learning and playing with dumbbells in the pool. And that's what gave me the respect for what Christian McCaffrey's been doing, because he's been going up there and doing that with those guys. Then we did like an assault bike workout in the sauna. Very different, very mental in comparison to physical. You get connected to your breath and you realize, wow, how many breaths do we take in a day? We don't even think about it. We take it for granted. And then so many of us are mouth breathers, and we breathe into our chest and our scalenes up high where it's very anxiety ridden. And then we wonder physiologically, okay, what's going on in our world? You've got anxiety and you've got depression higher than ever. Are these things associated with social media? Maybe. Are they associated with all kinds of other things as well? But we have control of our physiology. And then I started looking into Wim Hof, and I started seeing his breathing techniques. And I looked into the XPT breathing techniques, and I started getting into the Calm app and the Headspace app and really leaning towards meditation, realizing like, whoa, you can be this most badass physical specimen, but if you're not taking care of the things between your ears, you can't actually use all the tools that you have. You can have this beautiful tool set in your garage. If you don't know how to use the tools, how valuable are they? And so I started leaning into this sauna and ice practice and this breathwork practice and integrating energy healing and kundalini and all kinds of breath work associated with this. And it's created this amazing trust with people. It's allowed people to access levels of peace and fulfillment, which have then translated into the physical. I always call the sauna like the hot box. It's like a safe space for people because you're in this small, intimate setting. It's around 200 degrees. You're in there suffering together. And what's cool is when I have clients over, when I have high-performing entrepreneurs and business owners over, when I have special forces guys and Navy SEALs over, these are some of the most highest performing people on the planet. They don't have an outlet, Craig. They have no idea how to manage their emotions. Maybe they'll go to therapy sometimes. Maybe they have a little bit of a journaling practice where they brain dump. But the difference maker was allowing somebody, giving them this unique, very, very special opportunity to just be unapologetically themselves, where they could just let it out. Judgment-free zone. It's not going to get shared with anybody. You can word vomit for a second, and then you can talk through things together. And as a byproduct, people feel seen, heard, and understood. And it started as something that was helping me heal. And then I was able to pay it forward and wanted to share this with friends. And now it's like, whoa, it's this cool unlocking of a spiritual component that I didn't really think about for the majority of my life until the last 4 or 5 years. Being able to share that and integrate that into the ALLSMITH protocol is really cool. I also really like the fireside chats that we have. And I stole that from, there's a show called, I think it's with LeBron and his business partner, Maverick Carter. And I know they had one that was called The Boardroom, but they have another one where it's called The Barbershop or something like that. And they're all in a barbershop, and some guys are getting cuts and they're drinking glasses of wine. But it's just cool. You got Draymond in there. You got David Beckham. You've got some of the best basketball and football and entrepreneurs and musicians on the planet all sitting in this room together. Well, what's the commonality? Trying to do something great, trying to change the world, trying to innovate, try to push the boundaries on what's possible. Why can't we do that with ALLSMITH? Why can't we do that with fireside chats? Why can't we do that with sauna and ice? And why not share in really special bonding and connection moments of working out together where fitness doesn't own us? It's just something that we use as a tool to enhance the quality of our lives.
That sounds unbelievable. I started doing breathwork about 3 years ago, and it's made a humongous change in my life. Makes me feel more alive. I got less stress, less anger, less road rage, all those kind of things that have kind of been part of me for my whole life.
I mean,
breath
think
work.
about a balloon. When there's so much pressure in the balloon, you just give it a pressure outlet. Just you let it out for a second. You realize that like it's not just the story, but it's also just this trapping of air that creates a physiological response and a sensation that then either positively or negatively affects our mind and the story we tell ourselves and then our performance. So it's a great tool, man. I'm stoked that you're doing it.
It's the difference between being alive and not just breathing, right? If somebody sucked all the oxygen out of the room you're in right now, you wouldn't know it until you knew it, right? It's one of those invisible gifts that you get that gives you life, that allows you to hopefully do what the Creator created you to be.
Totally.
Walk me through the science, if there is science, and I'm guessing there is, between the contrast between hot and cold therapies. Because
There's
some
a
people
lot.
just do sauna because they don't like cold, and some people do cold because they hate heat. What's the
Yeah.
benefit?
It's a really great question. Before I get into any of that, I highly recommend for people listening to do it, right? Like before you get into the nuts and bolts, like have an experience and then take note personally, this is what I felt. I think that's a really important component. There's a lot of buy-in right now where people are like, wanting to listen to Dr. Andrew Huberman and Peter Attia and all the famous people that are putting out great knowledge. I don't knock any of that stuff. But that's like me being like, okay, you feel better after you go for a run. Do we need to get into VO2 max? Do we need to understand resting metabolic rate or stroke rate or how fast your cadence was? Like, to me, that's getting into the sand before you get into the rocks. And I think a lot of our world creates paralysis by analysis because they want the data, right? Like everybody's wearing a data tracker. Everybody's got a Garmin, a Whoop, a Fitbit, an Apple Watch. Everybody creates these gamified approaches. And I see that a lot with the sauna and the ice. Hey, how long did you stay in there for? What was the temperature? Does it really fucking matter if I feel better? Does it? Right? If I'm sleeping better at night, my testosterone feels like it's higher, my sex drive is there, and my joints are not in pain. I've decreased my level of depression. Does it really fucking matter? And that's my huge rant / pushback on some of these biohacking contrast things. Like cold water is cold water. It's going to change your response. Okay, we can get into the nuts and bolts of, you're going to get more brown fat, things going on. You're going to have a little bit more of a norepinephrine dump when you're getting into colder water, blah, 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 blah. All those things are true. But before any of that, just do it, right? Like compliance is the science. And I think if you consistently practice the art of exposure training, you develop this level of resilience. When you do that over the course of time, now we can unlock, okay, let's get into some of these variables so we can change the sensations and the response that it's having physiologically on you, your body, and your mind. And that gets a little bit more specific down the line for somebody that's been in the game for a little bit. I would say from a baseline standpoint, though, to answer your question, I would say somewhere between 42 and 48 degrees for the cold. I would recommend that people do the cold in the morning, and it's your first win of the day. I walk out the door. My dog goes left to use the restroom. I go right. I take the cover off. I step in. I take a big nasal inhale, mouth exhale. And as I'm exhaling, I sit into the cold, plug my nose, dunk my head, and expel air. As I'm underneath, I sit up. I have my 3 to 5 freak out breaths up. And then I nuzzle down. I open up my armpits. I crisscross applesauce to be able to get the cold water into my groin. And then I nuzzle down so it can touch my vagus nerve and my thyroid just below my neck. So I'm fully submerged up to the chin. From there, it depends on the day. The numerical value that everybody loves to tinker with is somewhere between 2 and 3 minutes. For me, now I practice the art of the breath. So big nasal inhale followed by a big nasal exhale after my original freak out. And I try to get 10 breaths there. That's my little negotiation with myself first thing in the morning. It's like, just get to 10. And then there are days where I'm like, I feel good. I'm going to hop out and I do a little self-reflection. There are other days where it's like, I'm not there yet. I skipped a couple days of this. Like, I need to build the resilience muscle a little bit more. I'm going to hang out here a little bit and I'm going to endure this discomfort. My body's wanting to freak out and get out. Let's just be. I don't need to do anything. I'm not going to die. I know that every time I do the cold, I feel better. Every time I don't, I regret it or I think about it. And so every time I do it, you talked about doing it this morning. I did it before this podcast. It changes my state, man. It gives me a different gear, like you talked about in relation to Christian McCaffrey. And I highly recommend it for people. And if they don't have access to that, cold shower's cool. Dump your face into some cold water. And don't get so married to the nuts and bolts of time or temperature or those things. Like, get in and get out day one. Get in, take 1 or 2 deep breaths day 2, and like build that level of resilience, and don't allow the ego to mitigate you actually participating or being enrolled in the process. I'll also say in a fitness world, so many people are like, I don't have time to execute my program today. I've got this meeting or that thing. It's like, who cares? I call it microdosing fitness. You've got 5 minutes. Go 5 to 8 strict pull-ups on the minute for 5 minutes. Over the course of the week, look at that level of volume accumulation. And I stole this from Jesse Itzler, but he's got the 100-hour rule. 18 minutes a day, 365 days out of the year, gets you to 100 hours. That could be 9 minutes in the morning of fitness, 9 minutes in the evening of fitness. That can be all 18 minutes at once. It's less than 20 minutes. You're probably going to be scrolling on your social media longer than that for most people. And when you do that over the course of time and you accumulate 100 hours, you're in the top 95% in that particular craft. So when you think about that mathematically, it's doable, man.
It's totally doable. It's stacking. It's here's what happens, and I've done it a million times myself. You know, when you start calculating how long it's going to take you to get to the gym, you know, you're going to be waiting on equipment. By the time you get back, you can't go. Where you could have, you know, you can do body weight exercises if you don't have a gym in your home. You can do it. You can do it on the drop of a hat. So what I do when I cold plunge, I took about a month off. I had some surgery on my back and I had to take a month off. It was ridiculously difficult to start over.
Mhm.
It hurt bad. I mean, I was 40 seconds the first time, where I can go, you know, 3 to 8 minutes without any problem at the moment because I built up that endurance muscle. And it's a little bit of like, you know, your body wants it because it's like, this is good for you, just like all the things you described. It really is good for you, and your body wants to feel good. And the water's not even that cold.
Totally. And I'd also say 40 seconds is better than 0 seconds. And then there's a psychological component of you're beating yourself up because you're not where you were. You have now this motivation of next time I'm making it to the full minute. And then there's also this level of grace of, well, I had to take time off for my back injury to heal. I wasn't supposed to be submerged in water. You have this justification process where you're like granting yourself the permission to be like, okay, it's okay that I did that. And I've done it before and I can do it again. So there's this whole spiritual component that is formulating mindset and resilience. And I think that's a huge part of the human experience. We don't experience that enough as adults. We start to get into the rat race. We wake up, we go do the same fucking thing underneath artificial lights to check the box and pay the bills, where the only goal becomes, can I make it to my pillow at night? But when you expose yourself to discomfort like that, it is a gamification that keeps your mind sharp, keeps your body sharp. And then, yes, scientifically, you're going to have a norepinephrine dump, which is this huge adrenaline response, which is why I recommended doing it in the morning. It's going to help you become more alert. And then from there, you're practicing staying calm with your breath. Notice I talked about nasal breathing, not mouth breathing. The mouth breathe will take place. Allow yourself to have that little freak out and then settle in. And what is that? That's, I got the triggering stressful email. I got in a fight with my friend or my teammate or my significant other. Somebody cut me off in traffic. I've got this injury. That's life. It's management of stress. And you realizing that you have the tools to manage your physiology. So then you're not making 25 bad decisions throughout the day based on the emotion. You're logically regulating your physiology to manage stress. That's what makes a great athlete. That's what makes a great husband, great father, great mother. The person that is able to manage and regulate heart rate and mindset in the midst of extreme anything. And you talked about Patrick Mahomes when he came back there in the fourth quarter. He's got tools that manage his physiology, whether he knows it or not. He has the ability to regulate. And then to contrast, to give you the answer for the sauna, a lot of different protocols. I would say that like the infrared is not the same as a dry sauna. You need to get the temperature up to a place probably over 185 degrees would be my recommendation. For people starting out, I would suggest 15 minutes. And I love listening to music. I love having friends in there and having conversations. And I also love the ability to like do nothing. And that's part of the reason why I put these things in there, because I was doing. And I was like, oh man, I'm blowing up my phone being in the sauna, so I can't actually have my phone in here. I actually have to just sit with myself. I can't be distracted by all the different options out there. So that was another thing that was really unique about the response that was taking place from the sauna. It forces you to just have some silence or some quiet time with yourself in a very loud and distracted world. That's where I'd start. If you're trying to really get into the weeds, I love doing 3 rounds of contrast, 15 to 20 minute sauna over 185 degrees, 2 to 3 minute cold plunge. And I don't hold people to a standard. I will have a running clock if people want to use it as a tool, but I want people to really lean in and check in and reflect on themselves. How do I feel? How do I want to feel? Where's this going? And for some people, hey, I know that at 3 minutes, that's when I get the secret dose for myself. For some people, it's 4. For some people, it's 2. I wouldn't be so married to the time, and I'd be more married to kind of that self-check-in. How do I feel? And then Dr. Andrew Huberman talks about if you're trying to enhance human growth hormone, this one's really freaking hard. It's 3 sets, 30-minute sauna over 185, 5 to 10 minute just natural cooling, not getting into cold water or cold shower, just natural cooling outside. And that supposedly is supposed to like 10x your human growth hormone and really enhance recovery and help with sleep. So typically I recommend cold plunge in the morning, sauna at night. And then when you are wanting to have friends or you're really trying to get a little bit sexy with it, the contrast of 15 to 20 on, 2 to 3 in the cold is a fun way to kind of get 2 or 3 rounds and really get that blood pumping.
And you are a reservoir of information about this stuff. I appreciate that because there is a lot of information out there. Some of it you don't know what to believe, but I can tell you from personal experience, I do sleep better.
Mm-hmm.
I think better. My body regulates to temperature better. I've always been a guy that's been hot all the time. And now I can handle the heat better. And I haven't been doing the sauna. I've done some contrast at various places, but in my own home, I just do the cold.
I'll also say this, that I'll use a metaphor from religion. There's a difference between quoting scripture and actually living it. And I think there's a difference between talking about working out or talking about contrast therapy and actually doing it. And when you do it consistently, you can speak to it with confidence because you've tinkered in the lab. You've used yourself as a guinea pig. You've seen what works. You've seen what doesn't work. You've shared it with friends. There's a wide variety of case studies. It's so easy and cliche these days to pull out your camera and video it somewhere. And, maybe you just checked the box. Maybe it was just an explorative experience. But when you really do it, it's adding tools and information to your headspace to be able to speak to it in a public fashion that hopefully pays it forward and excites people, and they realize the passion and enthusiasm that I have. Hopefully they can absorb some of that too.
Bryce, unbelievable, my man. I just looked at the clock. Is there anything you would like to add that I didn't ask that you're like, man, I'm itching to share this with the world?
One of my favorite quotes is challenges are what make life interesting, but overcoming those challenges is what makes life meaningful. And I think there's this ideology sometimes that people live with, which is I'll be happy when I get the job, when I make the money, when I do the thing. No. It comes in the form of consistent action every single day. And the beauty is in the work. It's not I'll work hard and then I'll get it. the beauty is the work. And it shifts the rules from this game of I'm trying to win to I'm trying to keep playing. And I think there's beauty in both. But I think if people realize, at least from a health and wellness standpoint, your goal is to keep playing. Your goal in entrepreneurship is to keep playing. And I think sometimes when you play with that ideology and you really marry yourself to the work and you love it, it's this really cool thing that you wake up with a pep in your step. And you're not doing it for the wrong reasons. You're doing it for the right reasons. And then the tools that you use are a little bit lighter. And it becomes that flow state that we alluded to with Christian McCaffrey earlier. That's something that I think is a really important piece for people to kind of note and add into their back pocket as they move forward with their lives. And the last thing that I'll say based on everything that we discussed today, the beauty is who we're becoming, not necessarily what we get. And so you talked about, my father with basketball, my mom's stuff. We talked a lot about Christian McCaffrey. We talked a lot about Patrick Mahomes, Caitlin Clark. These people are doing great things. But what's really cool is who they're becoming in the pursuit of doing great things. And that's the art within sport and coaching and life that I love.
I know people are going to want to check you out. Where can they find you?
On Instagram at The Real Bryce Smith. Our website is allsmith.co. And then our podcast is ALLSMITH. It's on all platforms, on Spotify, Apple, and also on YouTube.
You've been an awesome guest. I appreciate you being on Pro Mindset today, Bryce. Just for you listeners, you can find my book, Pro Mindset, that just came out here in the last month. Anywhere you want to find it, you can find it. And I want to thank you guys. You guys all go and have a great day. Hey, it's Craig Domann, the host of Pro Mindset Podcast. I want to thank you for listening or watching today's show. And you can catch us every week on the normal social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and all the listening podcast platforms. I hope you enjoyed today's show. And more importantly, I hope you gained a pro mindset insight. Please be sure to rate and review Pro Mindset Podcast. And I look forward to catching up with you on our next show.